Greetings! In today's video, I'll be taking you through a tour of my swatchbook. It's something I put together after seeing Jennifer Maguire's video about how she stores her ink swatches, and I figured it was a really good idea, and I love the fact that you can see 20 colors on each page. I got the same kind of sleeves and rings to bind everything together, and I gradually filled this out. I recently remade all the swatches that were in this, because I figured that the first way I had of presenting the colors wasn't super helpful. There was less space for the colors, and yes, they are all made on something like 90 pounds watercolor paper with the coin pocket pages. My first version of the swatches had a bit more information on the swatch depending on the brand and the availability of the information, but I realized that I'm not really using the transparency info or the granulation info because, well, granulation and transparency, they can be seen on the swatch, so I don't really need to write it down. And also I wanted the area of the paint to be much bigger. So I'm going to go through each color, and I'm going to start with yellow. I have 2 pages of yellow swatches. I tried to sort them in pigment, like I start with PY3 and I sort them as they increase in pigment number. At some point I get into mixes, so I just try to find some kind of logic and sort them that way, either if they have similar color or similar names or similar mixes. So that's PY3 at the top, then I have a couple of cadmiums, then a few mixes, and it just goes like that. Like, everything is sorted in a way that I hope is helpful for me, and on the back of the swatches, if it's relevant, I write in which set I can find the color. This is what my original swatches were like. I have a bunch of them because I had to redo a whole bunch of them, but yeah, for some of the effect colors I would put a black square, and for the other regular colors I would just put a tiny black square. And I don't know, there were like discrepancies in my system and it was bothering me a lot, so I decided to redo it all. Start from scratch and repaint every swatch there is. I also had to update my swatchbook because I've added a couple new paints to my sets between the last time I updated my swatchbook to now, so it needed a bit of an update. The next page is gonna be orange. I've only got 1 page of orange, if you include the fact that there's 6 quinacridone gold variants on this page. I put them with the orange because the original quinacridone pigment was an orange pigment, and I wanted them together so I can easily see how they compare to each other depending on the company. The paper is 90 pounds, so it's thin enough that it's workable and not too bulky, but it takes watercolor well enough too that I can have a good idea what the color will be like on a painting. The next pages are the red pages, or should I say red pigment pages, because as you'll see, some of the burnt sienna colors and some more brownish shades or purplish or pinkish, they will all end up in these pages because they are made with a red pigment. So I've got 4 rose red matter PR83 at the top, and there's a few PR101, which for some brand is what they use for their burnt sienna. I have a couple of opera rose or opera pinks at the bottom because they're made with a fluorescent pigment and a red pigment. And I've also got some of the pinkish red pigment without the fluorescent one, and many reds. And well, you can see from this picture, I mean, it ranges from the brown to the red to the purple. I've got a couple of repeated pigments. In this case, there is often not much of a difference between the repetitions, except for certain shades like the PR 101 has a lot of variations, but otherwise it's pretty simple. It goes from very different shades of pretty muted purples to one which is almost brown, and then you've got some pinks and reds. It's not as much sorted by color as sorted by pigment, so when I'm looking for a specific pigment to reference, I can use this logic to try and find it. That's my system for now. I mean, if it doesn't work, I can always change it, reshuffle every swatch. The next pages are for the violet pigments. These are all colors that either are violet in look or feature a violet pigment. I have a lot of PV19, both in the more pinkish red color and also a few of the violet color. There's a lot of dioxazine purple as well. These are fairly common colors, so it's not like I have to go out of my way to end up with a bunch of them. I have a couple of FX paints in there, like Lunar Violet and Moonglow and Shadow Violet by Daniel Smith. There's this color, which is, I think it's quinacridone pink. It's not PV19, but it looks a lot like PV19, so I'm not exactly sure if there are some difference between the paints on a chemical level, but they do look pretty similar. The following swatches are all my blue paints. These range from greenish blue to darker blue like indigo. There's a lot of repetition in these pigments as well, because there are some of these colors that are very common in the sets, like all the phthalo blue, whether it's the red shade or the green shade. They are pretty common in paint sets. This one is my favorite. It's PB16. This one is Helio Turquoise by Schmincke. So I got two manganese blue hue, a bunch of phthalo blue and phthalo blue reddish. And then there's a couple of Prussian blues at the bottom, and the odd Prussian green, and then these are technically the same pigments, but they really don't look the same. And then I have a bunch of ultramarine, because that's a fairly common color. These two cerulean. And yeah, a bunch of Indanthrone blue, which is fine by me because it's a color I really like. There are, as you can see, many variations in the way the pigments are treated depending on the company. It doesn't show as much when you look at, say, ultramarine, but when you look at PB60 at the bottom, you can really see more of the variance in the vibrancy of the color and the way it dilutes with water. My third swatch sheet for the blue is not full, it's not even half full, but I have all the indigos on there, and the Mayan dark blue, which looks a lot like indigo. I have the lunar blue in there too, which is a really nice paint with a very nice effect. I know that, well, as you can see from the swatches, I am not really skilled at making super nice smooth gradients on these swatches, but they still work, they still give me the information I need, and well, it was good practice if anything. I prefer to keep the swatches to one side of every sheet, like I don't have two swatches per pocket, I have only one, because it's much easier that way to shuffle them around. If I have to make room for a new swatch, I don't have to take into account all the other swatches that are facing the other side of the page. So I have 3 pages of green swatches as well. with again many repetitions in colors, but perhaps a bit more variety than I had with the blue. So there's 5 PG7 at the top, and the rest, a lot of them are mixes with some yellow or some blue. I have 2 Viridians. Then there's about another 5 swatches of phthalo green yellow shade, some perylene green. Perhaps I could revisit the way I've placed all these swatches and have some of the mixes sorted together by name rather than all over the place like this. Like I have many sap greens in there and olive greens, and they're a bit all over the place. It's still useful, at least they are all within the same pages. There's sap green, there's another sap green, there's a third one. I've put the cobalt green, even if it's bluish, I've put it in there because it's a green pigment. So there's another sap green color. That's some olive green. So yeah, it's a bit all mixed up, but I can still find my way because everything is labeled. That's why I do this. I really love this color, that's Cascade Green by Daniel Smith. It's a really nice mix, and I really love the blue tint it gets when you add water in the color. The next swatches are gonna be the earth tones, so all the beiges and browns and Payne's Gray. It's always striking to see how a recurrent pigment like PBR7 can take on so many different shades depending on if you have it for raw sienna, burnt sienna, raw umber, or burnt umber. It's really not the same, and even sometimes you can have 2 colors that have the same name and the same pigment and they don't even look the same. That's all the raw siennas. Then I got the raw umbers, then the burnt siennas, and the burnt umber. I have a couple of duplicates that are fairly similar in color. And then I got a couple more over there. The Van Dyke Brown, Sepia. So this is a good example of how easy it is to change everything around if you decide you want something in a different place. You can just switch the swatches. Switch the swatches. Which is a lot more difficult when you have another swatch on the back of these. Also, it's easier to remove a swatch from a pocket if there's only one of them in there. This is the last of the swatch pages that feature regular watercolors. It's the black and neutral tints and my single real white professional watercolor. So the neutral tints, they're all pretty different. I've tried to stick to interesting blacks when I had to buy them myself, and if they came in a set, well, they came in a set, so just gotta deal with it. The next pages are the Primatech pigments. Quickly, Primatech is a range from Daniel Smith that features actual real stones, either just regular stones or gemstones, that are ground and turned into pigments for painting. They have really unique colors and effects, and they are made from a single source, if I can say that. Like, there's not a lot of mixes in there, if there are any. The paints have some very peculiar qualities, either from the specific granulation of the rock, or even some rocks have a bit of a sparkle to them. This is one of my favorite, the Amazonite. I really love fuchsite, well, anyway, and all the teal green colors. I'm trying to show the sparkle in the kyanite, which we can see through the pocket sleeves, but I will take the swatch out just to show you. So the Amethyst Genuine has a bit of a sparkle to it. I think the most sparkly I have is the Kyanite Genuine. Yeah, this is Sugilite. It has a bit of a sparkle too. So that's the super sparkly Kyanite. And the sparkly Fuchsite has a bit of a sparkle too. This one is the Green Apatite Genuine. It has a really nice granulation effect. And there's also the Bloodstone Genuine, which is super granulating. I really tried to stick to the most vibrant Primatech I could find, but they tend to be a bit more on the muted side. Next page of swatches is the effect paints I have for watercolor. Well, I have a few Daniel Smith paints. I have 4 iridescent, 3 duochromes, and 3 interference colors. I think my favorite are the duochromes and the interference colors. I find that the iridescent color, they have a super nice effect, but they tend to be a bit more difficult to work in a flat way, if I can say that. Like some of the colors, they really will tend to lay down weird on the paper, or I don't really know how to work the fact that it has a base color in the paint rather than a transparent base. So with something that has a transparent base, I can overlay it on top of another color or mix it into another paint. What I like of the other colors, like the interference and the duochrome that are mostly transparent, it's because when you lay them on white paper, you don't really see anything at first. And then when you get the proper angle, the color gets all its effect and its shine. And I think that's pretty neat. I have 2 silver watercolors, one by Holbein and one by Schmincke. The one by Schmincke is a lot more sparkly. The one by Holbein is a bit more muted and dull. Same with the gold paints. It's Schmincke and Holbein. And again, the Schmincke paint is more sparkly. This is something a bit different. That's gouache, regular gouache, which is basically opaque watercolors. I have a bunch of different brands in there. I've got some Winsor Newton, M.Graham. I think I have 1 Holbein. This next sheet is still gouache, but it's acrylic gouache. And this one is the Holbein Acryla Gouache. I went and picked the colors I loved from their range, and I don't think I bought a set. The difference between regular gouache and acrylic gouache is the type of binder. acrylic gouache and regular gouache will both have a matte finish, but the acrylic one cannot be reactivated and it dries into a plastic. This is the Turner acrylic gouache, another type of acrylic gouache. Regular gouache, you can rework it, and it can be problematic if you want to layer on a painting, but if you leave it in your palette, you can add a bit of water and regular gouache will come back to life. While if you try to do that with acrylic gouache, it will just remain a blob of plastic in your palette. Turner's acrylic gouache is really affordable and there's a lot of colors, including many effects colors like metallics and pearls and neon colors, and they really have some fun stuff in there, and the tubes are really not all that pricey. So if that's something that you feel you want to try, you can get a couple of colors from Turner's and see how you like it. There's a couple of other swatches I have in there. This is my sheet for the Polychromos colored pencils. I don't have a lot of them. I have mostly the colors I want and the set of 12. So I use this sheet to keep track of the colors I have. Prismacolor Premier swatch sheet that I have yet to fill. These two sheets are the Dr. P.H. Martin Hydrus liquid watercolors. I've got all the colors available now except for one because it was raw umber and I figured I didn't really need that color. Two of them have a really bad texture, raw sienna and the red that's over it. They kind of went a bit clumpy, but everything else is really nice, and it's a bit difficult to use those colors because they are so super bright that it's hard to think of a way to use them, but they are really fun and I really should make more of an effort to make use of them. The very last sheet I have in my fig binder is color charts and tests and swatches from various colors that I use as reference. I don't use it all that often, but it's handy to have it there in case I need to check quickly something about a color I have. If I had to remove one sheet from this swatch book, it would probably be that last one, but at the moment it's still a manageable size, so I can keep it in there. These rings that I bought to close the thing, they're not super great quality, which kind of bums me out because they came in a big bag of them. I guess I figured that if they break I can easily move on to the next one, but ideally I would have preferred to have 3 good quality rings and not have to think about replacing them someday. That's my swatch book. It's not really my original idea, it's a hodgepodge of ideas from Jennifer Maguire's ink book and seeing other swatches by artists like Denise Sudden at In Liquid Color. And yeah, basically what I learned from making the first set of swatches too, and seeing that I would want more space dedicated to color. I think some of you will get it when I mentioned that it has to be set in a way that makes sense and that is comparable throughout the whole thing. So when I need to reference something, I can just fold it over like this and it doesn't take that much room on my desk. It can be a bit confusing for the sheets that have empty squares in them and you see the colors that's underneath, but that's not really a problem. It's a bit big, but then again there are many swatches, so that's what it is. I hope this was somewhat helpful, and if you have questions or suggestions or anything, just feel free to ask. I will not redo the swatches again, but I will listen to suggestions and concerns and tips and tricks. And if it's something you feel like you want to do, I say go ahead. It's fun in a way, it's very zen and repetitive. Most of the black lines for the opacity were made with a Sharpie, and the rest is waterproof ballpoint pen on 90-pound watercolor paper. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you have a great day. Bye bye!